Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this live debate broadcast sponsored by Activist Post. Today, Adam Kokesh and Vin Armani are debating immigration from an anarchist perspective. Resolved, advocating for open borders is advocating for greater freedom. Adam Kokesh will be arguing in support of the resolution. Vin Armani will be arguing against. The debate will consist of 3 rounds. Vin and Adam have 5 minutes each per round to make their case. Each segment will be timed, and the timer will appear on the screen. Vin will go first. Go ahead, Vin.
Thank you very much, Christian. I also want to thank Adam for agreeing to do this debate. It's an interesting one because we're both anarchists, and I think that fundamentally we both are against using state power to coerce others to do something. So a lot of people have said, well, what is this debate about? So I think maybe it would make sense for me to sort of lay out the boundaries of the reason why I thought that this debate would be useful to have. Basically, like I said, both Adam and I are anarchists. I myself am a voluntarist. I am an agorist. And so I do not advocate for state power to be used one way or the other. So certainly in this case, I am not advocating for open borders or closed borders, but because both of those are, the state actually has to do something. It's a state policy. But Adam is someone who advocates for actually government-based solutions, such as voting someone into office who could, with an executive order, abolish certain sections of the government, and that is a viable solution. For me, that's not a morally or ethically consistent position. However, as a pragmatist, I do understand that state action is going to happen. The agora for us agorists is not going to be built tomorrow, and that certain state actions certainly are either a help or a hindrance to the cause of freedom, to the cause of more liberty. And in this case, what I wanted to address was, and the tweet that started this all out was a tweet from Adam saying, "I'd rather an illegal illegal in quotes, take a job in America than a tax-paying citizen because less taxes will be paid that way. Less government equals more freedom." Now, I absolutely agree with that. Less government equals more freedom. But the question is, outside of sort of the mythology, outside of either demonizing or lionizing immigrants in general and illegal immigration, the question is, does illegal immigration, would a relaxing of border controls to allow more people in, with the way that things are, would it actually create less government? Would it actually create less revenue going to the government? Is that a true statement? Is that a reflection of reality that Adam has stated there? And overall, for both the people inside the country, the immigrants themselves, and the people back in their home countries, is it actually a net positive in terms of those things that we see as freedom? The free market, less state coercion, less money going into the coffers of the state. The fact of the matter is, illegal immigration is a net positive to the state, both the government of the United States and the government of Mexico. I've got the cold, hard numbers here about that. They're actually a net revenue generator. They're a net generator of, or you could say that they remove a certain segment of the population from Mexico that would be the revolutionary sort of vanguard, if you will. It removes those people who would be potentially the libertarians of Mexico and puts them in a foreign country where they're basically second-class citizens. This is not really, there's no debate about this either on either side of the issue. Either the pro-immigration think tanks, the anti-immigration think tanks, the numbers are there, and the government itself says that illegal immigrants are a net positive in terms of taxpayers. I'm going to go over that in the next little segment, but the majority of them are paying taxes. The majority of them are paying a higher tax rate as versus even the top 1% of Americans. So more, for every dollar that's earned by an illegal immigrant in the US, including the dollars under the table, that's the amazing part that most people don't know, including the dollars earned under the table, a greater percentage of it goes back into the pockets of the state, and not just the United States government, but also the Mexican government. So I don't want to put words into Adam's mouth if this is not exactly what he feels, but I do think that he should clarify his position on this, especially since, this is something that falls into the realm of the president and falls into the realm of the exact offices that he's going to be abolishing. So thank you. I'm interested to hear what Adam's real position on this is.
Awesome, Vin. Thank you very much. Very good, valid points. I'm going to pass it over to Adam now for 5 minutes. Adam, it's yours.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. And Vin, I really appreciate you putting this together and making this happen. But I got to say, I'm a little surprised because you kind of made it an easy debate for me with the premise. You almost made it too easy when you say, like, hey, is allowing people to be free this way good for freedom? And the answer is, of course, yes, because when we talk about open borders versus closed borders, first we got to clarify. What I say is that the only legitimate borders are private property borders. And so when we talk about open borders, we're talking about opening government borders. That is, government not being able to enforce its territorial monopoly by physically restricting, forcefully restricting, with the threat of violence, people's freedom of movement. The right to swing my fist ends where your nose begins. Similarly, my freedom of movement ends where your private property begins, not where the state puts up a little line on the map. This is the principled argument on this issue, and it's very simple to see that that is in contrast to the consequential argument that Vin here is making that says, like, well, if this happens, this might happen, which is basically the same old logical fallacy of the ends justify the means, and it's certainly not true in this case. But the whole argument that we should have government controlling freedom of movement on its face needs to be thrown out because it's based on a very silly false premise that government can actually effectively enforce restrictions on freedom of movement. And it's not to say that it cannot have some major effect, but it's like conservatives like to say about gun control: when guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. Well, when immigration is outlawed, only outlaws will immigrate. They will still find a way. All you're doing is keeping out the good people and letting those bad hombres in when you say, well, we're going to trust the government to secure us with a wall or a virtual wall or a fence or whatever it is. They cannot build a wall big enough that cannot be tunneled under or climbed over or swam or sailed around. The whole idea on its face is really, really silly. Second of all, the idea of the welfare state being a reason that we can't have open borders or we can't get rid of government enforcement of borders is ridiculous. It's basically saying, well, this happening here is wrong, so we're going to do this other thing over here that's wrong, that we admit is wrong, that even Vin says, is a forceful government action. So simple, I love being able to so easily with these issues and so readily boil it down to, the lessons that we learned in kindergarten that we never should have forgotten, like the principles of voluntarism: don't hit, don't steal, don't kill, is not unless you work for the government. Well, similarly, two wrongs don't make a right. And in this case, because we're seeing the wrong that is the welfare state, that is the theft, that is taxation, we have to have another wrong that is a violent restriction on individual freedom of movement, where there is a basic human right to move freely, restricted, as I said, only by the private property of others. So what Vin is opening up here, I'm really glad that we're getting into this issue, because it does open a very dangerous precedent that I think threatens our very movement and threatens our ethical core in terms of being true to our principles, maintaining to that that core direction. Vin says, I'm fundamentally against using state power, except when I can make this consequentialist argument. And I think it's really sad that of all things, freedom of movement is where this movement is failing right now, and it shows how I think easily led astray we are by the temptations of populism, consequentialism, and wanting to go along with what Donald Trump is doing. I don't want to pin all of that on Vin, of course, but I'm glad that we're getting into it, because it does seem to be a disturbing trend within the movement of that abandoning of principle. So, and to get back to what Vin was saying specifically, it seemed like he had a kind of a tortured opening there, admitting that he's advocating for pragmatism. And he starts out by introducing himself as, the voluntarist, person of principle, but I'll make an exception. It's like if you have exceptions to your principles, they're not really principles. So the other thing is he says, does it cause more freedom? And he's trying to make a metric of freedom based on how much money the state has. He makes the case that, if it's a net revenue generator for the state, that it's necessarily bad for freedom. Now, yes, the money going to government is bad for freedom, but to say we shouldn't do anything that makes money in a way that can be taxable is like an argument against productivity. This is the pragmatic thing as well, being principled, looking at reality and saying, well, yeah, we have a government, so we really need to make sure that we don't advocate for it doing anything more than we have to let it get away with at this point.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. Very good and valid points. I'm going to pass it back to Vin for the second round. Vin, you got 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm not actually sure who Adam is debating right now. He's certainly not debating me, because I never at any point said that I'm against government coercion, except I'll make an excuse for this one thing, that if we could do this one government thing, then it would all be okay. I'm not advocating for it at all. The person I'm debating Adam Kokesh, who's actually the only person sitting in this debate who actually is making the argument on a daily basis that I'm against government coercion, except for this one thing, like if you'll elect me president, then I will chop these things down. Now, that's a debate for another time. That's not what I'm talking about. But what I would like to do is I'm going to debate Adam Kokesh. I'd like Adam Kokesh to actually debate me. In terms of the person who said that less taxes means less government, that was Adam. I just read you the tweet. Here's another one. This is from a meme of his. Illegal immigrants break, this is a quote from Adam. Illegal immigrants break unjust laws, disregard borders, and work under the table without paying taxes to this anti-American government. We should be turning to the rebellious examples set by illegal immigrants to make America great again. I mean, here he is saying right here in his own words that working under the table without paying taxes is a good thing. The unfortunate part about this is that his statement is factually incorrect. And it's also intellectually, I don't want to say dishonest, but it's inconsistent at the least. So here are the real numbers in terms of taxes. According to Pew Research Project, there were 8.4 million unauthorized immigrants employed in the US. That's 5.2% of the US labor force. In terms of overall numbers, the Department of Labor reports that of the 2.5 million farm workers, over half are illegal immigrants. Growers put that at about 70% though. The Congressional Budget Office in 2007 said this: over the past 2 decades, most efforts to estimate the fiscal impact of immigration in the United States have concluded that, in aggregate and over the long term, tax revenues of all types generated by immigrants, both legal and unauthorized, exceed the cost of the services they use. Immigrants are a net positive. That's according to the government. A study from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy found that immigrants illegally in the US collectively contribute nearly $12 billion each year to state and local tax coffers. Undocumented, that's income, sales, property, and excise taxes. Undocumented immigrants nationwide, their average effective tax rate is an estimated 8%. To put that in perspective, the top 1% of taxpayers pay an average nationwide effective tax rate of just 5.4%. So a millionaire will actually pay the government less in taxes, a tax-paying millionaire, than a group of immigrants who have earned $1 million, illegal immigrants. The Center for Immigration Studies says approximately 75% of working-age illegal aliens use fraudulent Social Security cards to obtain employment. Stephen Goss, the chief actuary of the Social Security Administration, estimates that 1.8 million immigrants were working with fake or stolen credit cards, Social Security cards, expects that number to reach 3.4 million by 2040. This was in 2010. He calculates that undocumented immigrants, illegal immigrants, paid $13 billion into the Social Security Trust Fund and only got $1 billion in benefits. Illegal immigrants, net positive in a year, $12 billion in Social Security payments to the government. Workers who are paid illegally in cash still pay their taxes with an individual tax identification number, filing a return just like any other taxpayer, because the government has told them that if they have a history of paying taxes, that when some sort of amnesty comes around, that will serve as proof of residency. So they're paying those taxes, and the IRS has made a Faustian bargain now and said, pay the taxes and we won't report anything to immigration. It'll only be positive for you. And this is not being argued with by either side. Both sides of this debate, both the pro-immigration as a way of saying that immigrants are good for the country, and the anti-immigration people, the National Council of La Raza says the majority of undocumented immigrants pay income taxes using individual taxpayer identification numbers or false Social Security numbers. That's the most pro-immigration group there is, saying the majority of illegal immigrants pay taxes. I'm not the one who said they weren't paying taxes. Adam's the one who said they weren't. That's what I'm here debating. They are contributing to the power of the state, willingly and voluntarily, the vast majority of them. That's not what Adam has been saying. That's what I would like him to address, not the straw man that he's presenting me as a Trump supporter.
Very interesting, Vin. Thank you very much. If you guys are watching this live, please like, comment, and share below. Let us know what you think about immigration, and let us know what you think about the debate. Adam, I'm going to pass it back to you for 5 minutes. Adam, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Vin, for quoting me. I really appreciate that. So now I don't have to read my own meme and make my own point. So I don't know. I am starting to lose a little bit of where you're coming from, what you're actually advocating for, other than saying that certain elements of my argument might not be airtight in terms of the statistics used to back them up based on your interpretation of those statistics. And you know what? If I'm wrong about that, it's fine. Doesn't change the conclusion of my position, whether or not the illegals are a net contributor to the coffers of government through the income tax. Because what we're talking about is the position of, does this result in more or less freedom? Now, it could be that I was wrong about that analysis, and you can certainly point to all the ways that illegals do come and contribute to the state through taxation. But if you really want to use that as an argument, again, I'm not sure where you're going with this, that this somehow justifies a specific policy because you're making certain consequentialist arguments. Because, we could play that game all day long. I could ask you, what would it take to enforce immigration halfway effectively? You talk about Social Security numbers and all the paperwork that illegals have to get in order, or illegal immigrants, I should say, because when I say illegals, I'm looking at everybody who's here, whether they were born here and didn't get papers or, are just working under the table illegally in any form. If there's a specific comparison of who works under the table more by percentage of population, I would love to see like a really decisive statistic that shows that. But that's what I was referencing. If I was wrong about that, I'm happy to say I'm wrong about that. But that doesn't justify, asking government to turn to any kind of restrictions on immigration. All I'm saying is maintaining my position that that's an unethical action and is therefore in and of itself anti-freedom. So the biggest thing, if you want me to descend to this level of the consequentialist arguments, is to ask again, what would it take to enforce immigration halfway effectively? And it's always, it's a paper please kind of society. It's you don't have a right to work unless the government is overseeing that. And I mean, that's kind of where we are already today with the status quo. I'd like to see that change. I want to see progress to a less governed society. I want to see people be more free. So I don't want to entrench any state powers. I don't want people to be turning to the state to, based on any kind of consequentialist argument. But even with that, the most important one to me would be, I don't want to live in that kind of police state. I don't want to live in a world where, just to have any kind of economic transaction, I got to be showing my papers it's bad enough we have in Arizona, we have checkpoints that are 100 miles from the border. But I'm not, I'm not anti-pragmatist. I think principles are pragmatic. And so since you brought up the idea of the Kokesh for Not President campaign that is running for not president in 2020 on the platform of the peaceful, orderly dissolution of the entire United States federal government, making the states the highest form of government in the land, basically what we're going in as is a third-party contractor coming in saying, look, hey, we've got somebody who's stolen some goods here, namely the federal government of the United States of America. We have some people who want to cede the authority of the United States of America as a government by voting to say, look, yes, we're going to dissolve it. We want this executive order passed that immediately declares the federal government to be of no authority. So in a sense, it's the aggressors behind the federal government being able to step down in a way that the actual carriers out of that policy are no longer able to enforce. So when we do this, what we're doing is reclaiming that stolen property and doing the best job that we can to return it to people who it's been stolen from. There's nothing in this that is in any way contrary to libertarian philosophy or voluntarism. A lot of people would make the case, and I know, Vin, we're going on a bit of a tangent here, but a lot of people would make the case that voting is violence. And I highly disagree. Voting is an expression of preference. The violence is in holding an election and then forcing the results on people. So again, what you're doing by advocating for any government borders to be enforced at all, and again, I kind of got to go back to the principle of this argument and the silly arbitrary nature of it. Why is it that you want to stop people from crossing this line here and not this line here? And for me, it's about having my rights as a private property owner respected. I have a piece of land in Arizona. I have a right to invite whoever I want anywhere from anywhere in the world onto that land, and it is unethical of you or government or anyone else to do anything that would stand in their way of coming to my land through public spaces, through unclaimed or not private property. So again, it comes back to what is a legitimate border. If you're an anarchist, how can you advocate for a government border being legitimate in any way whatsoever? I think that's a great contradiction of Vin's position, and that's what I've been addressing directly this whole time, except when I was talking about Kokesh for not president.
Thank you, Adam. Very good, very good. So we're going to pass it back to Vin for the third and final round. Vin, you got 5 minutes.
So, well, first, with Kokesh not for president, I would just like to, obviously, the campaign is already quite a success because you're already not president. So you're the incumbent. It's fantastic. You're running as an incumbent. So, all kudos to you. All kudos to you on that. In terms of me advocating, yet again, I have not advocated for there to be closed borders. I'm also not advocating for there to be open borders. As an anarchist, I don't recognize state borders as being legitimate. But I'm also not trying to run for president of the United States, which is defined by a geographical border. I'm not asking people to go to their polling places and to register with their state, which is defined by a geographical state border, to vote for me so that I can go and remove the borders. But the thing is, if you can't remove the borders because you are, even if you're the president, not president, sorry, of the custodian of the United States, Canada still has government, Mexico still has government, they still have borders, and you're not, it's fine. Look, I'm all for it. Abolish the IRS, abolish ICE, abolish customs, take those borders down, take them down. Mexico's not taking their borders down. And as a matter of fact, they're going to move them. We know that. Canada's going to move theirs as well. So yes, I want to see that go away. But I feel like it's almost the same sort of situation where, I say I'm not for legalizing marijuana because I don't want the government to tax and regulate it. I'm for decriminalization. But at the same time, I'm certainly, when I don't want it to be regulated, and I support there being a black market, but I don't support every form of that black market. I don't support what the drug cartels do down in Mexico. I don't support that. So the thing is that you have to take a principled stand, but you have to also live in the real world. And here's the other part about it, that as a Mexican myself, I'm half Mexican, my mother's Mexican. My great-grandfather came here as an illegal immigrant from Mexico. We would be one of those immigrants. Why? Because the demographic of economic migrants and Latin American and the ones that come here, and whether they're from the Middle East, whether they're from Africa, whether they're from Latin America, in general, the biggest demographic are young, able-bodied men from working-class backgrounds who have enough ambition that they want to improve their lives. That's exactly who needs to still be in that country. Mexico's an incredibly oppressive country. Let's talk about what they give back to the oppressive government of Mexico. So basically, last year, remittances in Mexico alone were $28 billion. It's Mexico's biggest source of foreign revenue. A majority of the remittances, 67% in 2013, were sent by undocumented illegal immigrants. 1 in 10 Mexican households depends on remittances from the United States. So not only are the taxes going to the US government, but the exact group that historically has always changed history, who has always led to more freedom, young, able-bodied, working-class men with ambition, who want to better themselves, are being lured out of that country and yet sending money back in. They're not there to help their countrymen. I'm not supporting closing the borders. I'm not supporting opening the borders. I'm an anarchist. But what I'm saying is that there are certain government actions where we can look and say, for our cause and the overall cause of freedom, for the most majority of people everywhere, that certain government actions are going to provide more freedom. Certain government actions are less. One is preferable to the other. I still take a principled stand. I'm not for coercion. I'm not suggesting that this is what happens. But I'm looking at it and saying, I don't think we should be advocating either one. But I'm looking at it and saying, we have to take a real hard look at the reality, the real numbers, the real consequences, when we say which one is truly going to contribute to more freedom in the future.
Thank you, Van. Great way to close it. And we're going to pass it to Adam for the final round. Adam, you got 5 minutes.
Well, I hope we get another round of a little back and forth, and enjoy some conversation around this as well, and be able to ask each other questions more directly. I thought that was the original plan, but I'll start just by getting into two of the contradictions in the points that Vin just put out there. One, that he's an anarchist and yet saying people need to stay in Mexico to serve Mexico, as if he's recognizing now this arbitrary geographical association as opposed to looking at the world as a borderless area where people, goods, and services are allowed to flow freely in order to meet humans' economic needs, rather than be, shoehorned into these ideas of nation states, which he's now advocating for. And when he's saying more freedom, maybe he's trying to make an analysis of saying, like, overall, subjectively, if the freedom-loving young males stay in Mexico, then they're going to, have more freedom for Mexico. But if you're making a case for freedom in the United States, hey, well, let's welcome them. I mean, if these are the people who you say are going to drive the, human progress away from statism, away from government, we should be welcoming them. And of course, the ultimate filter for immigration would come if we got rid of the welfare state and stopped messing with other countries, rather than turn to one statist solution to solve a problem that the state created in the first place. And that is, rather than just this current problem with immigration, the general economic imbalances that require immigration laws to enforce, to maintain, to keep citizens of the empire as a special protected class. And really, this is a silly game that plays into nationalism, that plays into the identity of you as an American. Even Vin, in order to make his case, is talking about Mexicans versus Americans and wanting to see a revolution, or see people standing up to government, and I don't think he said revolution, standing up in that country versus doing their thing, whatever it is, if we welcome them here into the United States. So, Vin, if your argument really comes down to that there might be some consequences, that there are some metrics of freedom that you could apply to what might happen if immigration laws are not enforced as much, or if more immigration is allowed to happen, then you're kind of twisting the premise of the debate, and that's okay. This isn't like a super academic, gotta lay it out kind of thing. But if you say that, yeah, there are potential consequences of letting in more immigrants, that they're going to be productive and they're going to pay taxes, yeah, okay, I concede the state's going to grow. That's going to be unfortunate. But if you have more productivity and more freedom of movement, more economic freedom of association, maybe that outweighs that. Maybe you can't measure freedom in the absolute of how many dollars are in the coffers of the federal government. And I would say that's not really relevant anyway, because what really matters is how much of the economy is directed by coercion. So it doesn't, it's just as much a measurable violation of freedom if the federal government taxes you for $100 or forces you to spend $100 on their corporatocracy or some particular government service. But as for Kokesh 2020, it seems like you're more interested in talking about that and trying to put me on the spot about the contradiction there. If there's a contradiction there, you know what, I'm willing to hear it, but this is the pragmatic thing of how we move forward, how we apply these principles to provide as much as we can for freedom for as many people as we possibly can. Most people aren't going to take the time to embrace this philosophy on an intellectual level the way that most of us have. I know it's most of us who are activists have this silly fantasy that everybody's going to get it, but once you've been around long enough, you realize that that's not realistic. And even if you could convince everybody, every wage slave in America who's got a family, who's got kids and a mortgage and is relying on a government or corporate paycheck to maintain that lifestyle, you can't tell them, hey, so now get into Bitcoin and abandon that lifestyle. No, it is incumbent upon us, if we really want to preserve or provide the service, rather, of bringing as much freedom to as many people as possible, we make it as easy for them as possible. So if we can find a way where you can express a preference and vote, yes, vote, come out and say, I would vote for the federal government to no longer exist, yeah, we can make huge progress in moving the ball forward. That's pragmatism. Doing something and making a case, as I believe that Vin is here, in reinforcing that kind of nationalism, showing that there is that potential consequentialist argument on the issue of immigration doesn't help, because still what we need to do ultimately in order to bring about a free society or a voluntary society is to change the paradigm, change how people think. I don't know that it's going to happen through a presidential campaign like this. Might be a collapse first, might be a lot of secession, but I know that if we want to spread a message of principle and win people over, we got to stay true to those principles, and allowing for freedom of movement is clearly the principled position on this issue.
Excellent. Thank you, Adam. Well, guys, that's it for
hold on. We can go back and forth a little bit. I do want to clarify where I stand, and it's important to me on the Kokesh 2020, bro. I honestly, although I do believe voting is violence, and although for me the principle is that you don't vote, I am actually again, and on these things, it's one of those things where, in terms of preferable things, who would I rather see anybody but you as a Libertarian Party candidate? Fuck no, I wouldn't. Fuck no. I respect the fact that you have brought so many people to this thinking, and I know on a practical level that you doing this is going to take people who were formerly statists, and some percentage of them, they'll come out and vote, and 2 years later, or whatever, if it doesn't happen this time and you're going 2024, they'll be in our camp at that time, and I'm glad that you're doing this. I'm not going to vote for you because I don't vote, and I am right, but I am glad that you're doing it, and that it's not there's some other numbskulls out there, and you know what? You're preferable to anybody that the Democrats or Republicans or Greens are going to put up. So you know what, dude? While it's again, this is kind of my whole argument, that my principle is not to do it, but I can certainly look and see at the possible outcomes of certain things and know that, although you're not behaving in the way that's my particular principle, that I'm glad as hell that you're doing it.
Awesome.
Well, all right, we got that part out of the way. So about the metric of freedom, though, in terms of immigration.
Well, tell me what's your metric, because it seemed to me, certainly for me as an agorist, one of the biggest. I mean, almost agorism is predicated on the idea that the way through this is to take all of the revenue away from the state. So certainly our metric of freedom is the less money going to the state is always the better situation.
I can prove that that's wrong. I can prove that is not, and I mean it might be subjective here, but I can prove it very conclusively why, by my values, that is not the be-all end-all analysis. And it's because you could have a massive state that, say, controls 50% of the economy by dollars, but leaves everybody alone, other than the tax for that, respects people's rights. Or you could have a very small state that kills random people all the time. That's a total totalitarian police state.
But how do they pay for it? How do they pay for the killing? Because you got to pay people to kill. You know this as well as anybody does.
But so my point is, you can vary the death per dollar ratio of government, right? You could have a very small state that kills a lot of people, and you could have a huge state that generally doesn't kill people and respects people's civil rights. I mean,
but on the whole, if the state had $0, it would have very little opportunity to kill.
Right. All right. Again, so here's again, I'll go back to the point I made earlier, which is that if the state forces you at gunpoint to give $100 pay for a government service or to a specific corporation, it's just as bad as them stealing it from you in taxation and then giving it to those people. So I think there is a legitimate metric of freedom, or how much freedom is being taken away is probably a better way of describing it, because in a sense, human liberty is infinite in a way that it's limited only by how we compose our minds and relate to the world. I say this about capitalism. Capitalism is legitimate as a economic system based on ownership of the means of production. The ultimate means of production is the individual human mind, and the only legitimate metric of production is human happiness. So the metric that I would suggest for how much government in an area or the effect that a government has on impeding on that natural state of freedom is how much economic resources are directed by coercion rather than by choice. And again, that's kind of tough too.
Yeah, how do you, it seems like if I'm looking for a metric, I'm looking for something that I can actually measure, you know what I mean?
Right. My point is that there's always going to be a subjective analysis in this. Sure. And all you can ever really say for yourself as an individual is how much is your will being respected? How much force is being used against you? How different would your life be if you weren't having force used against you? And so I take that back to the issue of immigration and say, for someone who wants to be in one place and is forcefully put in another place, that's a huge misallocation of resources that would be going towards that person's pursuit of happiness.
I mean, I think we actually on that point we agree, certainly, and that's why that's why we're both anarchists. So, dude, I appreciate you. I appreciate you doing this, man, and I'll see you down in Acapulco. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great that we're talking about Mexico, because we're going to be there in just a couple of days. I'm actually flying out tonight. Okay. I'm at a friend's house in San Diego, and we're going down to Tijuana to actually.
Yeah, we know what you're going down there to do.
Well, it was the cheapest flight for the host of the conference, so we're happy to do a little adventure to help them save a little money. But I'm going to be I've never crossed the border on foot before. So
it's fun, bro.
What's that?
It's fun. I'm from Southern California, so I've been down there many times.
I think I'm going to sneak across just for the fun, so I can be an illegal immigrant in Mexico.
They're happy to have you. They're happy to have you. All right, man. Oh, it was great, bro. Thank you for being on.
Thank you, brother. Peace and love.
All right, see you. We'll see you down in Mexico.
All right, guys. That's it for the debate. We hope that you enjoyed. And thank you, Adam and Vin, and we'll see you guys soon.